Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January edition of Dad X Discussions. My name is Matt Strain, and I want to thank you guys all for being here. Today, we have a very interesting guest joining us. What we have, Dr. Laura Widman. Dr. Laura Widman came to my attention when she reached out to the network for some dads to beta test a new app that she was developing. She is a professor of psychology at the University or North Carolina State University. Sorry, there's too many of them all right next to us. Uh, but she's a professor of psychology there and specifically works with sexuality and specifically working with teens. But I'm going to go ahead and bring her on today as we talk about better ways to be a more approachable parent and to be able to make sure that your kids feel comfortable in coming to you with any questions they have. Because honestly, we'd all much rather have them ask us than hear about it on the playground.
Absolutely.
So welcome.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. So nice to be here.
And again, I know I gave a really abbreviated bio of you there. If there's anything else that you wanted to share about your work and the things that you've done, feel free, please.
Sure, absolutely. No, that was a great intro. Like you said, I'm a psychologist. I work at NC State University and I was trained as a clinical psychologist, but mostly I'm doing research now. My work focuses on adolescence, and I love adolescence because it's just such an important developmental time. There's so much growth that's happening during adolescence. That sort of period between being kids and having your parents mostly make decisions for you and tell you what to do, to really becoming, like a fully functional human out in society. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for growth, and really an important period for parents to kind of help with those decision making and the changes that are happening for teens. So yeah, I love, I've been studying adolescent sexuality for almost 20 years now. And as you mentioned, my team has been working on developing a new app that can help parents sort of support them in these conversations with their kids. So that's how we met. And happy to be here and talk through a little more of my work and take questions from the audience and see how
So one of the things that I want to mention is I'll say it up front. My daughter and I did do part of the beta testing for the first part of the app. And again, I will remind you, she is very frustrated because she's a completionist and it stopped her partway through the path. And she's like, but it's not ready.
She's my motivation to keep this work going and finish it.
I'm telling you, because it really was an interesting experience because, as a parent, everybody jokes about the talk, and you build it up to be this really big thing. And it's awkward for parents to talk about it. It's incredibly awkward for kids to talk about it. When I was growing up, my parents were relatively open, and I'm fairly certain I could have gone to them with any questions that I had. But my parents did the old school form, which was, when I had questions, now granted I'm very old, they opened up the World Book Encyclopedia to human sexuality and put it in front of me.
Yeah.
And let me read. And
yeah.
It answered the clinical questions, but it certainly didn't get me ready for navigating the world as a young man or as an adolescent or really dealing with relationships and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I have heard from parents over and over is like parents want to be open with their kids. They want to be the person that their kid comes and talks to about these questions. They don't want these questions to be as awkward, but they never had good conversations with their parents. I mean, that just comes up over and over. This idea of like, I want to do something different. But as a society, like we treat sex as a very taboo topic, even though we use it to sell things. It's in the media, the access now with the internet to information about sexuality, to pornography. Kids are exposed to all sorts of messages about sex, but oftentimes not just that really good, honest, open, comfortable message, because parents didn't get that message. And so that's, to me, one of sort of my goals is like, how do we break that kind of generational cycle of this like silence and awkwardness around sex, when I think it could be something that's it could be way more normal to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And again, one of the things that the app did, which I thought was really, really interesting, is the app is almost like two parallel apps. There's an app that I went through as a parent, and then there was a similar pathway and activities that my daughter did that were separate from mine, but were covering a lot of the same topics.
Yep.
Now, again, I'm assuming, because again, what she did was private for her. I'm assuming that the part that she handled was geared more towards an adolescent reading, as opposed to what I was reading, which was geared more toward what the parent was.
Yeah.
But
So,
go ahead.
yeah, well, just to explain a little bit about how the app works and what we think is sort of different about it is that there's a lot of really great information out there, actually, for parents. If you want information, I've got some resources I can share. There's great books, there's websites, parents can dig into a lot of information. There's also some really good information out there for kids. But the problem is there are very few resources that are like for parents and kids to get the conversation started. So, you can read good information that says, talk to your kids about these things. And then you're like, and how do I do that? So our goal was to create sort of a platform where you could have both parents and kids on the platform, kind of like you said, moving through the material. You could sit down and do it as a family, but it's also designed to be done sort of asynchronously. So a kid can watch the videos or do the activities and then ask some questions of their parents. We've got some, communication activities within the app and some communication challenges. And to your point about how we deliver the information, all of it we try and make very, kid appropriate. But on the parent side of the app, we also have some additional kind of parent tips and some prep work for parents. How do I become a more askable parent? How do I approach these conversations? So the information is a bit different depending on whether you're on the parent or the kid side of the app.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. And I did really like the fact that some of the activities were set up where, again, my daughter would go and do her part on her tablet, and then she would come out into the kitchen and be like, "Okay, Dad, we have to do this part now." And there was an activity where we had to talk about things. The one that sticks to mind was where we had to do charades and play out an emotion.
Yep,
Um,
absolutely.
and one of the things that we discovered is that my emotional acting is much more subtle than hers.
Ah, interesting.
Hers was very, very obvious, and I don't know if that was because she was trying to broadcast it, or if it was just that she was sticking with really basic emotions.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas I was thinking about things like being embarrassed or being shy, and she was more focused on being angry or sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
um
this might be a good time just to say that we're talking here about conversations about sex and
mhm.
sexuality, and sometimes people think that means intercourse. But what I actually mean by sex and sexuality is like all of that stuff that goes into puberty and bodies and healthy relationships and consent and protection and pleasure and sort of the whole spectrum of what it means to be, sort of sexual beings. And so, right, the app, which is intended for 10 to 13-year-olds, is much heavier on, puberty and anatomy. And so things like brain development and, your feelings and emotions, those are things that, develop. And working on those early communication skills, those are things that, we all can practice. Some of us didn't have great modeling for. And so working on some of those basic skills, I think sometimes parents get afraid. Actually, we see this in the literature. One of the biggest barriers to communicating with kids about sex is thinking your kids are too young. And that's regardless of the age of your kids, right? So
Yeah.
parents of kids of all ages think their kids are too young. And really, I think that's in part because we think what a conversation about sex means is explaining intercourse. And oftentimes, a conversation about sex means talking about boundaries and talking about healthy relationships and talking about emotions and puberty and gender and sexuality, sexual identity. I mean, there's so many things that are not just about intercourse. And helping parents kind of get past maybe some of that fear, like, is my kid too young?
Well, and again, that is an ongoing discussion. Especially, again, I can't speak for the moms community because I'm not a mom,
Yeah.
but definitely in the dads community, there has always been this ongoing discussion about, where things go and how we communicate with our kids and when is the right time.
Yeah.
One of the, I reached out when we booked you and asked the guys if they had any questions they wanted to submit in advance. And one of the dads asked like the most prescient question I've ever seen. And it's just, he said, with two preschool daughters, I'm concerned about future situations where they could be the victim of sexual assault, where they're convinced to keep the secret from their parents.
Yeah.
He said, I'd like to be parenting toward that now, but they feel like it's too young to have that conversation with the kids being 3 and 5.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of other dads that will tell you, it's never too early to talk about the idea that, if it doesn't feel right, you need to tell somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are things that from birth parents can start doing. I mean, maybe not birth, but as children get a little bit older, start to talk, using proper names for body parts. It's, to me, it's always ironic. I teach a human sexuality class to undergrads, and one of the activities we do is we take the word penis and we come up with all the words people can think of for the way that penis has been described, right? So penis is one of the words, but we have all sorts of slang terms, euphemisms that we use for penis. Same thing for vulva or vagina. What are all the terms you've heard? And then I say, and let's say elbow. What are all the terms you've heard for elbow? None, only elbow. Like, we just call elbow elbow, but we don't oftentimes just use penis. Like, we just say penis. Here I am, right, on an interview saying penis, because it's just a body part. And
Mhm.
sometimes that early on, talking with kids, labeling body parts, just using correct terminology, talking with kids about appropriate touch, right? So sometimes it can be helpful to use things like, as kids get older and they understand like what a bathing suit is, where private parts might be, getting touched in one of those private parts that a bathing suit would cover, that's only something that a doctor or a parent, if there's a medical kind of concern, might touch. So you can start those conversations very, very early. Even things about just kind of bodily autonomy, with kids. Is hugging okay? Do they want to be hugged? Can they have a little bit of say over, somebody wants to hug them and they're not comfortable with it? Maybe they have an option to give a fist bump or to give a handshake or a high five instead of a hug. Starting to teach them that, their body is their own body to make decisions with. And so those conversations, again, it doesn't mean you're just sitting down and telling your kid what sexual abuse is, but you're starting those early conversations about, let's be comfortable talking about body parts, talking about boundaries and consent. And that can start really, really young.
And consent is a huge one. Now I will say default. I am married to a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So as a result, a lot of these lessons were beaten into my head the minute that our daughter was born.
Yeah.
So the entire time that we've been raising our kids, consent has always been a very, very large thing that has been taught.
Yeah.
We will ask my children, hey, can I have a hug? Hey, can I have a kiss?
Yeah.
We may even like reach out and put our arms out like that. And both my kids feel comfortable going, not right now. And we make sure not, and again, I won't lie. It doesn't feel good when your kid says, no, I don't want to hug you.
Yeah.
But we both work really hard to hide that disappointment from our face because I don't want them to feel guilty. I want them to understand this is your body. These are your boundaries and it's your rules.
Yeah.
By far. And again, being a psychiatrist and coming from the, coming from the medical field, the proper names for everything from the get-go. She still corrects me more often than not.
Perfect.
Now we've had a couple of questions come in for the folks that are watching live. Arvis Brakeen asked, can this app be tailored for kids that are a little older, like 14 to 17?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say that that is my goal. My initial body of research is always focused on adolescents, more in that range, kind of high school students. When I first started this idea around developing an app, I actually have another program that is for 14 to 18-year-olds, but it doesn't have the parent piece. It's really sort of a comprehensive sex ed program targeted towards teens. It's also, short and fun and engaging. Hopefully teens, I've done a lot of evaluations, they like it. But in wanting to bring parents into that conversation, we decided we needed to start younger, because the earlier you can start, the easier those conversations are when kids get to be 14, 15, 16. And it does get to be, the conversations get a little more complicated. They get a little more personal. They get harder. So we're starting this app for 10 to 13-year-olds, but that is absolutely my goal, is to expand it for families of younger kids and of older kids. We're right now just in the phase where we have some research money, where we support from the National Institutes of Health, where we've been sort of developing and starting to evaluate this app, but our goal is to be able to expand it over time.
Now, Nick Hargis, who mentioned earlier that they've already started discussions with consent, the talk, and boundaries, and the rest of it with their kids, which I think is fantastic. But they had the question of, is there also a potential focus for the mental health discussion with kids?
Yeah, thanks. We have also been brainstorming that. I work with a colleague that does a lot of work on mindsets around mental health and those conversations. And so in the app right now, we've got a resource section, and there are some resources around mental health for kids and adolescents. But a lot of what we are building in the app in terms of family communication about difficult topics, I think can apply to other topics like mental health, like substance use. And so that's another one of our goals over time, is that we could expand out that content. Because really the focus of this, I think of it as a communication coach, right? Like, how can we help parents be more askable? How can we help kids understand that these are really important questions, and it's okay to be curious, and it's okay to talk to your parents. And so that could go to many different topics. So thanks. And I see there's some enthusiasm for it.
And I will point out that when we were going through the app, especially in the section where they start talking about the physical and chemical changes that come with puberty, there's definitely some addressing of mental and emotional health in that category.
Absolutely.
Talks about the changes in brain chemistry and, things being, it's more than just the physical changes when you go through puberty.
Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. We talk about hormones, and we talk about how, different emotions and coping with emotions, some sort of coping strategies. And so those do absolutely apply to mental health. Yeah. Perfect.
Now, one of the other questions that was asked, and again, it's an ongoing thing that I've heard so much of in the dad community, is all the time there is the question of, what do I do when my daughter or my son starts talking about dating? And when I first got involved in this organization, one of the most amazing things that I saw was the immediate pushback from so many of the dads that are part of the network to that whole, I'm going to meet my daughter's first date at the door with a shotgun kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Most of the guys in this community, and most of the parents in this community, I have seen, have moved much further along into the, if I've done my job right, I don't need to do that, because my son or my daughter or, my child is going to be making decisions that are going to work for them.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be bringing home somebody who isn't going to be good for them. I mean, hopefully we're installing the values and the information in our kids that they need to make the right choices.
Yeah.
But, one of our dads, asked the question that, his daughter brought up dating. And he says point blank, I don't want to be that dad. But the question is, how do I listen to her wants and still give his guidance without it seeming too restrictive.
Yeah.
And in my mind, because again, my daughter's at around that age as well, where that started to come up, and my bigger question is to set it up to where it's a communication and not a confrontation.
Yeah.
That we're working together on this idea, as opposed to her trying to get more freedom out of me and me desperately trying to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the fact, thank you to the person that raised this question. And I think the fact that you're even raising this question and saying, how can I provide guidance, but also not be that dad, maybe not be too restrictive, makes me think like you're already in a place where this is going to go well. Like you're concerned about your kid. You're not trying to, sort of be the authoritarian that says the conversation is closed. It's my way or the highway, right? You're already approaching it with that attitude of communication. So I think you're off to a great start. Like you said, Matt, I think ideally the groundwork for this conversation has already been laid. You've already been somebody that's, talked maybe to your kids about healthy relationships, about consent, about boundaries, about the things that they'll need as they get into a relationship to know, what's healthy, what's not. That's a question I get asked from teens a lot. My work is on sexual health, but adolescents oftentimes they don't have the questions just about sex. They have questions about, how do I know if it's a healthy relationship? How do I break up with somebody? Right? Like just learning how to be in a relationship. And so I think approaching that conversation with curiosity, when do you think is the right time to start dating? What does dating even mean? Sometimes there are different definitions by generation. Yeah. So what do you mean by dating? What do you think would be the right time? How would you know if it was the right person for you to date or not? Being curious, asking those kinds of open-ended questions, I think that is going to set you up to not be that dad, but to really let your child sort of have some say in what's going to be, an important process for them, learning how to really become an individual who is not just, a child who's told what to do, but that's really a developing adolescent who has some of their own sense of agency and is starting to make some decisions for themselves. And so if you can be that kind of support person, and of course it's important for parents to provide that, guidance and that monitoring. It's okay to have family rules and boundaries and hold to those. But figuring out maybe with your kid, like where are the boundaries and what are the things your kid gets to decide on.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nick asked the question of, is the app available now or is it in testing?
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. So we're still in testing, and I'll put my contact information if anybody on the call, is interested in being one of the testers. We'll have some more testing coming up this fall, and so I'd love to make it available now, but we're certainly still developing it. It's not kind of on the market. Oh, thanks, Teen Health Research. That's so. And we kind of jumped right in, Matt. I wanted to also
we did
put a disclaimer though, right? So I'm a professor of psychology. But I also started this small business called Teen Health Research. And the goal of that is to try and get this work I've been doing for 20 years at the university sort of out of the university and into the hands of parents. So that's the idea of building this app. Eventually, the goal is to somehow commercialize it. And that might be in partnerships with nonprofits. I mean, I certainly believe in health equity and delivering things for free or as cheaply as possible for families. But I do just want to put that kind of like conflict of interest that I have this company. We're not selling anything right now. If you want to test it for free, reach out to me. But at some point, this might become an actual product that's available for sale.
Well, I was going to say, I know that you have a slide deck set up, and it actually has some really good screenshots from the app that I remember from when I was part of the testing group that did, I think we did the first 3 stepping stones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Do you want me? So maybe I'll present the slides.
Go ahead.
Perfect.
And while you're pulling that up, I will mention that we did have one other question, but I think this one might be something for you to think about for a little while because that's a deep question.
The puberty and ADHD. Yeah. I saw that question and I thought that might be a good question actually for your wife, who is the psychiatrist. That's a little out of my wheelhouse. Certainly puberty is that time where we've got that surge of changing hormones in teens. And so when we've got all sorts of changing hormones and changing brain chemistry, I think that would be a good time to consult a family doctor or to consult a psychiatrist if you've got some concerns about how that might be impacting your kid.
And I will be the first one to say, your primary care physician, your family doctor is your best friend in the world.
Yeah.
They know your family way better than the specialists do. Um, Start with them and let them refer you to where you need to go. It has done wonders for our family.
I think, Matt, I've got the slides. Do you have
Up
to
there
share
it
them?
is. I
Okay.
have to put you up there. There we go.
Okay. So just to quickly, I'm just going to maybe like zip through some of these. Stop me if you want, Matt, or we can.
There we go. I'll get that out of your way.
We can skip over some of them, but I'll just run through in case these are helpful
Yeah.
for anybody. So we've already been talking about this, but just to sort of set our stage here too, we know that talking with kids about sex can be scary for parents and it can be cringy for kids. And I've already sort of defined that, I think about sex as something much broader than intercourse or just the physical aspects of sex, but we think about all things related to sexuality and sexual activity and puberty and all those good topics. And I also mentioned this already. We know that this is sort of this generational cycle that keeps repeating, this like concern about having these open conversations. We did one study where we interviewed 600 moms and dads and asked, what do you wish your parents had told you about sex? And just over and over, basically the answer was anything, right? I wish they would have just not given me a book to read, slid a book under my door, just wish that they were more open. So that's what we're trying to address. We know, I think everybody on this call, you're probably here because you know that this is important. We've got a lot of decades of research now showing all the benefits of having these open and comfortable conversations with kids. You can tailor information to your kids. Sometimes parents think, well, these things will be covered at school. We don't have any national we have some guidelines, but we don't have any national policy around sex ed. Each state determines what the sex ed policy is going to be. We still have many states that offer no sex education or abstinence only sex education, even though we know that is not effective in helping teens either delay sex or use protection. And so it's important, even if your kid is getting really good sex education at school, they're also getting sex education from their friends, from the internet, from porn. And so being that source of sort of trustworthy information for your kid is really important. You can also help tailor it to your own child and also to your family values. What do you believe about sexuality and about relationships? What are the boundaries you have in place, for your kid, for your family? And we know that open communication can help kids reduce risky sexual behavior when they become sexually active, and improves sort of overall sexual well-being as kids get older, helps them with that sense of their own kind of sexual agency, sexual pleasure as they get into relationships. So lots of good reasons, again, probably why many of you are here. And should we pause here, Matt, and talk a little bit about being an askable parent, or should I jump into the app?
No, absolutely. Let's very, very much talk about being that askable parent, because that's the main thing that I as a parent want to be.
Yeah.
Is I want to be the source where if my kids are having a hard time really with anything, much less sexuality, that they feel completely comfortable coming to me or coming to their mom and having this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to, the question about dating, or even, questions about mental health, I think this can apply to many things. I wrote these questions sort of applied to sexuality specifically, but being an askable parent can mean being askable across a whole host of topics, that become tricky as kids get older. And so when we think about sexuality, one of the first things is, do you think your kid is old enough to learn about sexuality? Because if your approach is they're not ready yet, and if a question comes up, you get really nervous, or you say, oh, we'll talk about that when you're older, that's going to tell kids, ooh, this is not a safe topic to bring up. And so really thinking about, like, it might be hard to think that your child is, becoming a more sort of independent sexual being. Like, of course, parents don't like to think about that. But first, just recognizing that these are really normal parts of development. And I think most people probably want at some point for their kids to be in healthy romantic relationships. Maybe you want that when they're 35 and not now. But even if you say when you're 35, it's appropriate. How are they going to get there without some of these sort of foundational skills? So,
And one of the things that I've always tried to base my reactions on is as much as I would love to think that my 11-year-old daughter or my 7-year-old son aren't old enough to learn about this, aren't old enough to know about this, and wanting to hold on to that childhood innocence. The reality is, if they're old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to know.
Yeah.
Because if we don't answer the question, somebody else is going to.
Right. Right.
Whether that's Google or their friends at school or who knows who else.
Yeah. And that's what we see, by the age of about 10 or 11, a lot of these conversations are happening in peer groups. So if kids have questions about like, what is sex? Or, I heard this word oral sex, what is that? Or, whatever term they've heard, porn, what is porn? If they're not asking you directly, it's very likely they're asking friends, or they're hearing something on the bus, or, friends are sharing it. So these are conversations that kids are not avoiding. And then it's a matter of, are you going to be one of the people they can come to ask these questions? So yeah, I think, knowing that they're old enough and can do it in ways that are developmentally appropriate. You don't have to go into tons of detail, but just knowing that you can be a person that they can ask questions to. The second thing was just getting comfortable with, saying penis and vagina as easily as you say elbow and toe. And for some of us, that's easy. Maybe you grew up in a family where your family always used those terms and it's no problem. But for a lot of people, they didn't grow up being comfortable with these terms. And so it may take you a little practice. You may need to, have coffee or drinks with a friend and say, we got to work on me just saying these words out loud so I don't freak out around my kid. So just sort of getting comfortable with the topic, with the terms. Another thing about being askable is really trying to, listen more than you speak. And so the goal is, for the most part, that these are not lectures. These are not one time, let me tell you what it is, let's have the talk and it's over. They're conversations. This is your kid. You don't have to get it right, because you'll have an opportunity to have this conversation again, right? If you're staying open, if you're staying curious, it's kind of back to what I was saying about a kid that might ask about dating. When do they think it's the right time to date? What do they think a healthy relationship is? Why are they thinking about dating now? Is there anybody they're interested in? That's a very different approach to a conversation about asking questions and listening than just, here's the rule, you can or you can't date. So being askable means creating that environment where you're curious and hopefully the conversation keeps going.
And I also like the point that you made about asking them, what does dating mean to them? Because it was a long time ago, but I do vaguely remember back in 5th and 6th and 7th grade, you would talk about how, so-and-so and so-and-so are dating, or so-and-so and so-and-so are boyfriend and girlfriend. And what did that mean other than you ate lunch together and maybe held hands during recess, or snuck a quick kiss in the hallway? It didn't necessarily mean that you guys were going out to dinner and catching a movie.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. For the most part, until, kids, teens are a little bit older, most of dating means maybe putting a label on something. Maybe there's some texting now, right? Not the old fashioned calling like we used to have to do, but, maybe there's some texting. But yeah, I think that's, asking, are any of your friends dating? What does that look like? What do you think about dating? Yeah. I think that next point about thinking through your own values about sexuality, about love, about relationships, about bodies. Sometimes parents have their own trauma to address, but really thinking about, where did you learn about sex? How do you feel about sex and sexuality? And I think if you can focus a little bit on those values, as opposed to, again, just the rules, you can or you can't do this. Sometimes those values discussions can be really important with kids. So again, back to dating. Can I date? Well, what do you, as a parent, what do you think about dating? do you value, trust and open communication, respect? Like, what are the things that you think make for a healthy relationship? What are warning signs you might see in a relationship? What do you think even about your child's own kind of autonomy, having ability to make decisions for themselves? Everybody's going to have different values when it comes to this. Some people really have a value that, people should wait to have sex until they're older, until they're married. Other people's values might be, I want you to wait until you're in a healthy relationship, or you can be, taking care of things like protection and responsible enough. And so talking about that as opposed to yes or no, you can or can't have sex, can be much more impactful for kids as they're trying to make their own decisions. Because sometimes parents can say, no, you don't do this. But if kids haven't thought through their own values about why, what is more appealing than doing the opposite of what my parent says I should do? So thinking through your values. I think that next point, even if you're afraid you don't know the right answers, have the conversation anyway. Sometimes parents get hung up on that. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm not going to know what to say. It's going to be awkward, or my kid's not going to listen. Well, if you try it and you bumble and you say the wrong thing, then you come back and you say, I want to revisit that conversation. You asked me a question and I wasn't ready, and I think it came out wrong. I've thought about it a little more. Here's what I wanted to say instead.
Yeah. And never be afraid to admit that you don't know something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are such great lessons for kids, right? Like that you can apologize, or you can say, I don't know, or, you can revisit something, because that's what you want your kid to be able to do over time. And so absolutely, you don't have to know everything. And it's okay to say, let me think about that, or let me look that up and get back to you. Not to say, you're too young for that, because that's going to close down the conversation. But maybe you need to think about, how am I going to explain this in a way that is appropriate? So let me get back to you, and then get back to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of that last point too about, are you confident in your own knowledge? A lot of parents did not get their own good sex education. And so, maybe whether it's through, again, I'll share some resources, it's through reading something, it's through taking an online program, but, educating yourself. Sometimes I have a whole stack here in my office that I'll share, but lots of really good books for kids. But I think sometimes parents just reading the book first, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
that was a good way that they described that before you give the book to your kid. Maybe it can help. So.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I feel like I'm yammering on and on. Just want to make sure if there's any questions, or should we keep.
No, we everybody seems to be hanging on to every word, because we haven't had any new ones asked.
All right, we'll jump in if anybody has questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see, just a couple more tips. We already kind of talked through these, but just to have them on a slide. Communication is a skill that you can improve. I spent a lot of time in my undergrad human sexuality class practicing, right? We practice scenarios and we talk about sort of good communication skills, and people oftentimes realize, wow, we use communication every day, but oftentimes we aren't sort of taught how to be good listeners, good communicators. So you can improve on that. Listening is really important. Remembering these aren't one-time conversations. And if you bumble an answer, you can take a deep breath and come back to the conversation. Also, if this makes you really uncomfortable, like practice is one of the best ways we get better at something. So, practice with a partner or with a friend. Say, I don't know how I'm going to bring this up to my kid. Can we talk through it? And you might find that there are a lot of parents that would love to have that conversation and say, I've been thinking about that with my kid too. And then lastly, that, educating yourself, getting that broad base of kind of accurate knowledge you can share.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Those are tips that sort of, this is part of the program that we've developed. These are tips within the program. There's a few more, I thought, really good ones from Planned Parenthood. I'm also happy to, share these slides with anybody that's interested, or, Matt, you already have a copy of them if you'd like to share them with people. So maybe I won't read through all of these, but just again, the importance of being curious and asking open-ended questions. And sometimes I think it can be helpful, especially parents of younger kids. Parents sometimes get concerned, their kid says, where do babies come from? And they say, oh, like, is it time? Do I have to explain all the birds and bees? And sometimes the kid is literally like, no, like, where do they come from? Is it like, the stork or, like physically, oh, babies come from inside mommy's belly. Oh, okay. And they're like, cool, that might be enough. But so you could say, like, where do you think babies come from? Or how did you hear about that? Before even giving an answer. And that will allow you to know what is your kid actually asking, as opposed to assuming they want something much more detailed.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's see. Keeping answers short, explaining words, keeping the conversation open, and checking their understanding. Does that answer your question? What do you think about that? Can be ways to, again, not just say, does that make sense? Which is just a yes or no, but to say, what do you think about that? Or, how does that sound to you? Those questions can be helpful.
Yeah. Keeping them involved in the conversation so that you're talking with them and not at them.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So I've got some websites. I don't know if we want to pause for a second, if people want to write these down, or again, we can share this, but there's just Amaze is a really great website that's got some short videos and information. They have a section that's both like for parents, and then they have a section that's for kids, and they even have this junior section that's for really young kids starting about the age of 4, and then all the way up through information that's appropriate for older teens. And so that could be a really good spot to the person that asked if the app could be tailored for older teens.
Yeah.
Sharing Amaze with them might be a good resource. Planned
Or
Parenthood.
the sexetcetera.org.
Yep, Sex Etc. is really for teens. It's vetted. It's content that's written by teens, for teens. Teens can write in questions, and then it's sort of vetted by some professionals to make sure everything's accurate.
Nice.
That'd be another great resource.
And again, for the folks who might not be able to write all this down, or you don't have something nearby, remember we do keep these on our YouTube page, so you can always go back later in the day or tomorrow or whenever and fast forward through until you hit these slides and write down all the information you need.
Perfect. Great. I put my email up at the very end as well, and happy for people to just email me directly if you were like, I know you shared a resource and I can't remember what it was, or if you've got a specific question and I can try and share a more tailored resource for you. Oh,
and I also dropped your email in the chat there.
There you go. There I am. Perfect. Just another slide, some recommended books. There are a lot of really great books out there, and that depends on the age of your kid. So here's a few that I've read that I like, but there are many, many more.
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep going. So I think the next slides, Matt, are about the app. Do you want me to kind of just walk through what the app looks like?
Yeah, just really quick, because again, it was a really great experience for me and my daughter. And, like I said, I'm looking forward to when you guys expand. And I know that we have a group of dads who have all reached out to us through the network saying that they would be interested in being parts of panels or interviews or that type of thing, because it's not that easy to reach at-home dads.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I was so pleased, finding your organization and getting connected to some dads that want these resources. What we found, for the most part, it's oftentimes moms that are looking for this information. Oftentimes these conversations are sort of falling on mom's shoulders, but I think it's so important for all parents to be approachable and to have good information, and love getting dads more involved. So yeah, happy to be here and share, and so thankful for your organization. So.
And if anyone is interested in being a part of that dad panel, that is all coordinated by Dale Van Vlera, who is our volunteer coordinator. You can email Dale at that email address, and he would be more than happy to help you volunteer with the organization in any way that you would like. And if you're interested in doing the surveys and polls and beta testing and that type of thing, just let him know that you're interested in being a part of the dad panel.
Cool. Great. Okay, so I'll run through these slides really quick. Happy to pause if people have questions they want to throw in the chat. But basically how this works, this is kind of the zoom out version. So the app is set up like a little path, and you can kind of see in that zoom out version. I should say, the app is actually right now programmed as a web app, which means it's available on a web browser. You can use it on a computer, a laptop, a tablet. But it's also, well, we're still working to really optimize it for mobile. It's available on mobile now, but it's a little the formatting is a little funky, but our ultimate goal is that you can use it on mobile, you can use it on web. And so this is kind of what the home screen looks like, where there are these series of sort of units. There's a path with these units. Each unit has these 3 little steps in the path, and you can see kind of the unit titles. This first unit has just for parents, a few steps to kind of help get parents started on being askable and thinking through your values and your parenting mindsets. And then there are these 5 different units that are for both parents and kids. And they cover topics like growing up, it's okay to be curious, and brains and feelings. They cover a section on puberty and bodies, healthy relationships, sex and reproduction, and sort of who am I thinking about gender and sexual identity. So that's generally sort of the content that's covered in the app. And then how we deliver that as you move through those little steps are through some short video clips. We're trying to keep everything to about 2 minutes or less, which even 2 minutes, I think for a lot of kids is like, oh, this long, boring video. So we know we've got to like try and maintain their attention. So short videos, we've got some little quizzes that give tailored feedback on, what the answers are. There's some activities, there's reflection activities. This activity in puberty was about building a hygiene plan. And this is the kind of thing where, Matt was saying on the child side, they might work on building their hygiene plan. And then one of the activities would be to discuss the hygiene plan with a parent, or to send it through a communication sort of chat that we've built, a communication journal. What else? We've got some family communication challenges. That was the emotion charades that you mentioned. And then
that really was fun.
Good. I'm glad. And that's what we try to have a lot of activities. We've got some podcasts. We've got those more like interactive activities, because we know people learn differently, and what might be fun for one kid, another kid is like charades. That's for little kids. So trying to figure out how to keep everybody engaged. But then we have a journal where kids can go in and either select from a drop-down menu of some pre-populated questions that we have, or they can write in their own question to send back to their parent. And what a lot of kids have told us after testing this is that they really like that ability to have kind of that private, safe space where they could ask something that maybe was uncomfortable, but they didn't have to look directly at their parent. And the idea here is not that we replace all in-person communication, but it actually just provides, another entry point. Maybe they're most comfortable starting with a question that they write out, and then hopefully that evolves into something you talk about together. Or even if you don't talk about it together, but you have a chance to answer their question here, they came to you and they got your input. So that's the journal.
Yeah, I got the when am I old enough to date question through the journal.
You did? Okay, great. So did that turn back into a journal response, or were you able to talk about that?
No, the two of us sat down and talked about it face to face.
Yeah, love it.
Which I would like to point out was nice, because having gotten the question in advance, I had a chance to actually think about it and get myself comfortable with the fact that, we're going to have this talk, whether I'm ready for it or not, we're going to have this talk.
Yep. She's ready.
And prepare myself to walk in a better way.
Yeah. I love it. Perfect. That was all. There's a little bit more to the app that I didn't put up, but we've got within the app some resources and so a Q&A page and a few more features. But again, we're only about halfway done building this. We built it out through those first 3 steps, and we've still kind of got those 3 units. We've still got 3 more units that we're building now. We've tested it with about 35 families, but we'll be testing it, hopefully I have another grant that we put in, and hopefully we'll get the funding to do a much larger test of the full app with about 200 more families. So feel free to reach out to me, or like you said, I guess Dale could be another good person to connect with.
Yeah. Now, again, we did get one question submitted that I know is not from your field of expertise, but it is kind of a big question, because, part of what you're talking about here is talking about, life and sexuality and that type of thing, and making sure that you're there so that your kids feel comfortable talking to you. And while this doesn't really have anything to do with sexuality, one of the dads reached out and said that their grandfather has pancreatic cancer and is coming to the end of their life. and as well as the grandmother as well is also reaching into that category. And we all know that these things are going to happen. And when he or both of them die, how do you communicate things like that to a 4.5 or a 3-year-old or even a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old?
Yeah.
Um, how do you tell them about, big issues like death?
Yeah.
And, do you bring them into the funeral and, like, let them experience that part of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, so sorry to hear about this. For everybody, that oftentimes, dealing with those kinds of end of life things, they can be so hard as adults to grapple with. And then to have to also explain that to a child is really, really difficult. You might be coping with your own grief, your own feelings. And so those are hard conversations. And it might stem back a little bit to even what we talked about with sexuality and thinking about, your own personal values. It's hard to give kind of blanket advice because people think about death in very different ways. They have, different beliefs about what might happen after death. And so, reflecting on what you believe, what you want to talk with your kids about, I think that would be a first place to start. And then remembering, especially with kids that are 4 or 5 or 6 years old, kids at that age they're very concrete in their thinking and don't have an ability to understand really abstract concepts. And death, especially if you start talking about sort of the afterlife, if you believe in something like heaven or what happens, that is a really abstract concept. And so, trying to keep things kind of simple for kids, but, even if you said they might be able to understand, grandpa has died and he's not coming back. But even
Mhm.
that is like not coming back today. Like they'll
Right.
forget that, right? Because they might ask over and over, well, when are they coming back? Well, they're not coming back. But if grandpa lived in another state or another city to begin with, there may be lots of times where grandpa didn't come back right away. And so
Mhm.
I think just remembering that kids aren't able to process death like adults do. And so there's not going to be a right answer in how to approach this with kids. I think understanding your own values, being loving, whether they come to a service or not, there's not a right answer there. You're going to have to decide for your family, how emotional might you be? Might that be traumatic for a kid? If you're really emotional and they're there, maybe it's best not to have them come. Again, for them, it's not going to be the same sense of closure that you might get for an adult going to a service like that. And so it's hard to give any kind of concrete advice here, except to
No.
say if you're approaching it with sort of love and with open communication, with a lot of these topics, there is no right answer. And you're doing the best you can. That's what a lot of parenting is.
Well, I can speak a little bit to this. I had an older sister who passed away when she was 12 and I was 8. And I remember my parents talking to me about this. And again, stay true to your own beliefs. If your family is religious, if they go to a church, there's no reason not to share those beliefs with your kid. Um, One thing I can tell you is that, especially young kids, they're a lot more resilient than you think they are. I know that I dealt with the passing of my sister a lot better than either one of my parents did, at 8 years old. It's one of those facts of life that's going to happen, and we all hope that we don't have to expose our kids to that for as long as possible. But eventually, grandparents, the older family members in your family are going to pass. They're going to have friends who have family members pass. There will be pets that pass. And it's just one of those discussions you have to have with them. And again, don't try to be open about it. Try to discuss it with them honestly. Don't be afraid to show that it hurts you too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think probably one of the hardest parts for me in dealing with it was that my dad didn't deal with it very well. And there were a couple of years in there where he kind of shut himself off.
Yeah.
But, eventually he opened back up and, we were able to build a good relationship. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that those couple of years were tough for me,
Yeah.
because again, I was 9, 10 years old. I didn't know why dad suddenly didn't want to spend time with me anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just keeping those lines of communication open and making sure that they feel comfortable and, oh, for the sake of yourself and your own sanity, don't make things up.
Yeah.
Don't just make things up. It doesn't benefit anybody to tell your kid that babies come from the stork or they're found under a cabbage leaf or anything else.
Yeah.
We don't need to go into graphic detail, but talking about the biological functions of, one person gets pregnant, the other person helps them get pregnant, they carry the baby comes out of the parent that is carrying the baby. Those are just honest scientific facts, and that's not going to hurt any kid. And using the proper names for things will also keep them from getting in trouble at school.
Yeah.
Because scientific terms are a lot less likely to be taken as potty mouth talk than using the slang terms are.
Yep.
Well, look, Dr. Widman, thank you so much for coming to join us. I really, really do appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
We're coming up on an hour here, and we've had several people with us the whole time. I really do appreciate everybody taking the time to visit with us today. A couple of things that I do want to mention is we do have our annual convention coming up this year, Home Dad Con 2025. This will be our 29th annual convention that we have done in person. This one is going to be in San Antonio, Texas, from 9/11 through 9/13. You can get all the information you need at our website, which is athomedad.org. Go onto the website. It will give you information about becoming a member, buying tickets to the convention, links to all of the different aspects and services that we offer. Again, in addition to what I do, which is the Dad X discussions once a month, there's also a podcast called Home Dad Chat, where Brock and Danny are on, usually once a week, if I'm not mistaken. But they run a podcast that has been the top stay-at-home dad podcast for, I think, 3 or 4 years in a row now. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of the different social medias. We're out there. One thing that I do want to mention is that we also have a fundraising 5K that we've begun doing at the convention. It is the Dad's Run 5K. This year in San Antonio will be our 3rd year of doing it in person. And all the proceeds from that go to our Fathers Overcoming Adversity Fund, which is a charitable fund that we established as an organization to help out families where dad is the primary caregiver in the event of a sudden illness or tragedy that strikes the family and makes it where dad can't be that primary caregiver anymore. And, a little bit of a financial assistance may help someone. Instructions for how to apply for those are available on our website, as well as applying for the Brian Dixon Scholarship Fund, which helps dads who may not be able to afford to come to Home Dad Con make it to the convention. But again, I recommend everybody make their way, come see us, come listen to the podcast, and again, have an absolutely great day. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. And we will see you guys next month.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.